Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello. Last day we discussed or concluded the discussion on the public intervention, the programs and schemes done by the government of India and the state government after the till the current years. Today we will discuss the urban reforms. We already talked about the various programs or the schemes where we mentioned that various reforms were the part of the programs. One by one, slowly it took the pivotal position to create an enabling environment or facilitating environment for the housing market. So, today we will see that what are those reforms which created a fantastic environment in India where every stakeholders including private, public and semi-public organization, they are trying to contribute in the housing sector or the basic services for the housing sector. So, first among this reforms, before I go to the main discussion, I just tell you, just recall our discussion on the barriers of the housing provision, which we discussed in the last two lectures. We identified that barriers were basically finance and land. Most of the barriers are finance, land and technological barriers. So, we will see today one by one what were the reforms and how it tried to solve the current problem and the issues. So, first reform which Government of India came up in after 2000 is the 100% foreign direct investment in housing construction. That was not permitted before this time, and government they considered that unless we get the foreign funds in housing, the overall flow, money flow and overall construction and supply will not be adequate to achieve the housing for all, which we discussed last day. So, 100% foreign direct investment in housing project, it was permitted, and it is a very important reforms in terms of the current enabling market of the housing. And as a result of this, many projects, about 400 to 500 projects with the foreign direct investment, it came after the year 2000 to this time 2015 in various states across the country. So, this is one of the major reform in the housing finance, and basically it helped the institutional finance, that is the project finance, by creating enabling environment, by creating support to the developers, by giving a support to the developer in terms of the finance of the project. The next was the Urban Land Ceiling Act. In you must be knowing that in 70s and 80s there was land reform in rural areas and urban areas. The main objective of the land reform that time was to distribute the land into various hands. The objective of the land reform was to stop the jamindari system and to distribute the land in various hands, so that the poor people who are basically using the land for long, they get their part, their bit of their land. Similarly, with the urban sector, the Government of India, they came up with the urban land ceiling, urban land ceiling act in 90s. The main objective of this land ceiling act was that no person in his own name can have the land more than 500 square meter in an urban area. So, this land ceiling basically makes a condition where not a single individual person will have a bigger chunk of land, and its ceiling was in most of the cases 500 square meter. So, as a result of this, initially the objective of the land ceiling act was very great, but finally we found that due to this land ceiling act we were not getting the large chunk of land in urban areas to invest in housing to create a bigger housing project, because in 500 square meter plot we cannot make a bigger housing project, bigger community as such. We can maybe do a standalone building which can offer maximum to 10 to 15 households. So, that was the problem. We were not having the bigger chunk of land, even after the foreign direct investment in the housing project, even the finance is there, investment is there, but land is not there. So, after that when JNNURM, last day I talked with JNNURM. So, in JNNURM this was one of the major reform that for the state government, that they have to repeal or withdraw the Urban Land Ceiling Act, so that the major lands can be amalgamated, combined to make a bigger parcel of land, so that investor and the bigger projects can be done on that bigger land. That was the major reform. Now, the fact is, the except one or two states, most of the state government, they have repealed or withdrawn the Urban Land Ceiling Act, and as a result last day I talked about the affordable housing in partnership. So, in partnership or through the joint venture mode, the government authority like Housing Board, Development Authority, or the state government authority, in partnership with the private developer, they are having the bigger land with the foreign direct investment, they are able to right now to create bigger housing projects. So, that is a major reform in last few years. Then third major reform was in Land Acquisition Act. Sometimes even through the Land Selling Act is repealed, you amalgamate the land, but in urban areas the getting bigger land is even much more difficult. So, the another major source of the land was through the Land Acquisition Act. Through this act, any government authority, any public body, they can acquire land for the public purpose. If the project is very big, if the housing project is very big for the lower income group or the middle income group, they can acquire the land. But the problem is the due to Land Acquisition Acts, its nature, during last couple of years we have seen that due to its nature, the people did not accept the Land Acquisition Act as a very social instrument. Rather, we have seen that due to this Land Acquisition Act, there are various incidents of social unrest and various incidents of non acceptance by the people as a tool to public intervention. So, for this reason, government basically was compelled to revise the Land Acquisition Act, and they came up with a revised Land Acquisition Act in 2013 and 14. They came up with revised LA Act, and with some amendments. Basically, the fundamental difference between the earlier Land Acquisition Act, which was framed in 1894 during British period, and this Land Acquisition Act is that in the earlier act there was no provision of taking the consent of the people who are basically owning the land right now. But in this approach in 2013 and 2014, the major difference between the earlier act and the new act is that any government authority, before acquiring the land, they have to take the consent from the people, so that the based on the consent of the people only the land can be taken. There are few more other elements, but we will not discuss right now. We will have a dedicated lecture on the legal part, so that time we will discuss, but definitely after this Land Acquisition Act, it is now the land acquiring is a comparatively easier mode from the public perspective. It is comparatively challenging mode from the private perspective, but definitely it is a major reform in the urban reform in the housing market, which is enabling the market to deliver the more number of housing. The next reform which was there is basically the controlling the real estate investment and controlling the developer. Before this act, actually in India, except few state governments, there were no legal provision, no legislative provision to control or to manage the real estate development or the housing development or the developer. So, Government of India, in 2013 again they came up with this Developers Act, whose main objective will be to maintain the transparency and transparency in the transaction for a common man, for a housing, for getting a housing, and accountability for the private developer. So, under this Developers Act, every developer has to register their project under the statutory body in each state government, and not only that, they have to keep some amount of money as a security deposit, so that eventually if they do not perform, they do not deliver the housing as per the prescribed, as per the contracted specification, transparent specification, and they are ultimately they will be forced to return that money to the end user or the buyer. That is the main objective of the Developers Act. So, Developers Act created a major reform in the urban areas in controlling the market, in controlling the developers. Apart from the Developer Act, another reform came, which is called as Real Estate Investment Trust. In short, REIT fund. So, objective of the REIT fund is to mobilize the finance from the market, because the middle income group and higher income group, they often invest money in various financial instruments, in banks or in various financial institution. So, the objective was whether those investment, at least some share of those investment can be mobilized, can be accumulated, can be used in the real estate sector to further increase the cash flow or the money flow in a transparent way in the market. That was the objective of the Real Estate Investment Trust or REIT fund. Right now, so far it is under, I mean it is not functional, but the Developers Act, it has been converted as an act, and right now it is, but definitely many state government, they have to adopt the, or they have to take the actions under the act. That is the major reform in terms of the developers, control of the developers and the housing market. The next reform came during the 2000 and the after 2010 was the property tax reform. So far we had a system of the property tax which was having a uniform collection of the tax for the people irrespective of their income category. So, so, in this reform, government tried to have some variable segment or variable parameters of the property tax, so that a poor person, a common man who are buying a house with a minimum amount with their hard earned money, they can register their house with a minimum amount of property tax even up to 1%, only 1%. Whereas the higher income group or middle income group, they can continue with the property tax with 7 to 8% or at the as the rate prevailing at the state government. So, that kind of the variable property tax based on the income category or the housing typology category. For example, the government of India during the affordable housing in partnership paradigm, they proposed that the slab for the income category and the property tax could be like lower income group, middle income group, or as per the floor area like 30 square meter or 60 square meter. So, major reform or major achievement under the property tax and the stamp duty paradigm was that to have the variable kind of stamp duty and property tax. And another reform which came through in the property tax is that deviating from the individual based property tax regime to a area based property tax regime in the municipal area. So, property tax and stamp duty both make the reform in the housing sector towards the more active market, towards a more people friendly market in the housing sector. After that, we see another reform that we have already discussed, mentioned last day, that is interest subsidy in housing finance. For the common people, the interest subsidy up to 5 to 6% will be given by the government, whereas the remaining part 2 to 3% or 4% can be given, can be afforded by the common people for the housing finance. So, this will basically enable a common man or a group of people to buy the housing, buy the house from the market. So, it will increase their affordability, and this is basically a demand side intervention. It is create more demand from the market, from the people. So, all these reforms and some incentives in various state governments, like say creating a market of variable floor area ratio and giving additional floor area to the developer or to some residential districts or residential areas to the developers and joint venture, which actually facilitated the private developers and creating an enabling market. Those kind of practices were also taken by the government of India and the state government and also some municipal corporations and development authority, by giving additional incentive in terms of FAR or the flexibility in the building rules, so that they can supply more housing. That was the another reform along with the financial and land reform which came. So far we have discussed the land reform, land, financial reform and some of the legal reform. In the next session will discuss the housing policies in details, starting from the first housing policy, second housing policy and latest national habitat and housing policy and rental housing policy. Thank you.